is going to be a messed up one. Sorry about that, everybody. Sorry for the crazy video here. Today I just wanted to do a video about how to find a counselor for teenagers. You know, a lot of folks ask me, I think a lot of folks want to get their teen into counseling, but they don't know the first step or the steps that they would need to go through in order to find a counselor for their teen. And I really do believe that if more people knew, if there was a process for going about it, if and when your teen needs counseling or your kid needs counseling, then you would have a process by which you could go through and do that. So the first step, and for many, finances are an issue. I know that they would be for me. So the first step would be to decide whether you need your insurance to pay for it or not. And if you have insurance, and then to look into that. And so I would start there. If it were me, I would certainly start with my insurance plan, and I would look at benefits to see, do I have mental health coverage, and to what extent do I have mental health coverage? And I would review that very thoroughly. And then I would go and see, under there's going to be different listings: psychologists, counselors, social workers, therapists, LPCs, marriage and family therapists. I would look under the different names of people who actually do outpatient one-on-one counseling and cull that list of names. And then I would share that list of names with someone, with a friend, to see in your area, to see if anyone knows any of these people, or if you have any friends who are counselors, to show them the list, to say, is there somebody on this list whom you could refer me to that would have experience working with teens? And then I would, or is there anyone else who has experience working with teens as a counselor? And then I would pick up the phone and I would call those people. I would call at least 2 or 3 folks and see if you can get on the phone with the counselor, and just tell the receptionist, if you get the receptionist, hey, I just need a few minutes of their time. I just want to ask a few questions before I schedule the initial session. And ask the counselor, hey, do you have experience working with teens? Do you like working with teenagers? Here's why that's important, is because you could have written a treatise, you could win the Nobel Prize for psychology and in therapeutic endeavor, right? But if you can't build rapport with teens, if you don't like teens, then the ball game is over. None of that information, none of the experience, none of the knowledge is going to translate, is going to get through, because you haven't opened the door. And so folks who have experience working with teens, who like working with teenagers, and that's half of it. That's more than half of it. I would just want to know that. And if there's a specific issue, I would say, do you have any experience working with teens with this particular issue? What is your experience with teens who are depressed? Is that something that you feel like you've successfully treated before? And then that's kind of what you want to know. And then if you want to, then schedule the intake session, and you can ask more questions in the intake session. But don't be afraid to get them on the phone. Most receptionists, gatekeepers, if you will, are prepared to answer those questions. So you could just even ask them those questions. Go to their website, see if they've written anything, if anything's been written about them, what work they've done in their field. Do they claim to work with adolescents? And there's a difference between children and adolescents. Like, I don't work with children 12 and under. I really, 13, it's a crapshoot. I really want to meet the 13-year-old to find out. But there are folks who specialize in that. There are folks who work great with kids who may not be able to work well with older adolescents. Some can span the continuum, but you want to find that out, because that's important. So check that out, show that list of names. And so some folks were like, well, how do I do this without outing my teen? I want to respect their privacy. I don't want to infringe on their privacy by sharing with folks, hey, I need to find a counselor for my kid. And so what you might do is find someone who you can trust and see if they can ask for you, to say they could show that list of names out of anyone and say, hey, is this someone who you could refer? Is there someone on this list you could refer me to? You could even say, I have a friend who is looking for a counselor for their teenager. Could you recommend anyone on that list? So there's ways of doing it without necessarily outing your teen or really violating their right to privacy, which would be important. So then look them up online, make the phone call, make the initial appointment. So I mean, that's the process where how you would find a counselor for your teen. During the initial session, you'd probably want to ask these questions. When and how often should we expect communication from you? So, because different counselors handle that different ways. Some counselors communicate a lot with parents, and some communicate almost very little to none with parents. And so there's a continuum there. I err to the lot side. I tend to communicate more with parents, but it depends, and it depends on every teen. So ask the therapist that. How do you handle issues of confidentiality? Under what circumstances could we expect that you would break confidentiality and let us know that? How could we support you and our child in this process of counseling? What are some things we can do? What are some things we should not do? Again, clarify reasonable expectations with the therapist. Tell the therapist what your expectations are. Say, hey, we don't know if these are realistic or not, but this is what we expect for what we're paying. This is what we expect. If there's something that you feel we feel is important that happens between sessions, is that something you want to know about? And if so, what would be the best way to let you know about that? How would we handle that communication? Is that something that we should all come in and sit and do? And some therapists everybody does it differently. We all have our unique style, but these are questions that you'd want to ask in the first session. Ask the therapist, what would progress look like for you? Because we have an idea of what progress looks like for us, but what would progress look like for you? When should we expect to see progress? When would we be able to expect to hear from you what maybe either a diagnosis is, what your understanding of the issues involved are, and what would the course of therapy look like? Is it going to be every week? Is it going to be every other week? Is this going to go for 3 months, or is it going to go for 3 years? And while they're not going to be able to answer that with a great amount of specificity, they will be able to speak to those questions, usually after meeting with the teen 2 or 3 times. And again, everyone does it differently, but those are some realistic expectations. Understand that it's a process. You may not get it right the first time. You may go in and love the therapist. Your teen may go in there and just not click with the therapist. And it doesn't really matter how much you like them. If your teen cannot work with that therapist, then it's time to find a different therapist. Go back to your list, go back to your network, and find a different one. If, say, your teen really likes the therapist, but you don't click with the therapist, then that would be more communication might be needed between you and the therapist to talk about. But a lot of that should probably happen on the front end in your initial intake interview. If your teen has a preference for a male or female, young or old, then I would take that into high consideration. I don't think it needs to dictate the ball game, but I would take that into consideration highly. There are a lot of factors that involve the therapeutic relationship. I often hear people go, well, I tried counseling and it didn't work. And what they usually are saying is, we had one experience with a therapist. The expectations were not clear up front. There wasn't clear communication throughout. There wasn't communication up front about how the communication process would go. And the parents felt left in the dark. The teen ended up liking the therapist, may not have gotten a whole lot out of it. There's 1,000 different scenarios. I would not let one experience with a therapist ruin you on the whole counseling process. I know myself, I've seen 3 different therapists for me, in my life. And I've gone to some for one session, but like, that's not a good fit. On to the next one. This isn't a good fit. And then I found a good fit. Don't expect anything different from your teens. Where parents, I think, their urgency is, look, Roy, it's taken a lot to get my teen into therapy. We've got one shot. Well, then that's why research up front. That's where communication up front goes. And there are some ways of dealing with that if your teen doesn't want to go. So how do I get... Hey, Chris, thank you, Rachel, for tuning in. As a youth minister, I'm prepared to offer a few suggestions of therapists in the area. A youth minister could be a great starting point. Absolutely. Your youth minister, contact your church. They could be good starting points. But youth ministers, you're so right. Many parents ignore the youth minister when they suggest they see a therapist. How can we go about encouraging that? I would just continue to encourage it. I always get in, so if they resist, Chris, that's a great question. So if parents resist, so what's the resistance about? What's going on in the mind of a parent? And I would ask that. I would probably ask it like this, to say, what does that mean for you? You know, when I've suggested seeing a therapist a couple times, and I realize you guys haven't really pulled the trigger, and I know life gets in the way and all sorts of things happen, but if there was something else going on, like what makes it hard for you? Like, what makes it hard for you to even think about your kids seeing a therapist? And what you'll likely hear for the parent is a great amount of shame and embarrassment. And as I sit here, I'll tell you, if and when I need to pick up the phone and call one of my colleagues one day to see one of my boys, that is going to be a very humbling experience for me. And which is what gives me such great amounts of empathy when parents actually come in here and sit on my couch, because I know how hard it would be for me to make that phone call. I know how much would have had to happen up until that point for me to be able to make that phone call, because it's in our nature as parents to fix it. If there's something wrong with my kid, it's in me to fix it. And so it's a great dying to self. It's a huge amount of dying to self to go, all right, this is something in my kid that I can't fix. And I'm going to have to sub this out to someone, especially in the teen years when they're pushing against parents anyway, to find someone who they can talk to. And a counselor comes in when it could be something, an adjustment issue. And again, we aren't the only ones who kids can have a safe place to talk to, but when it's something more serious, something that's affecting school, something that's prolonged. And I did a whole podcast on this about what's abnormal versus normal behavior. When you're in that abnormal range, right, meaning that it's intense, it's sudden, and the frequency and consistency has happened over a long period of time, then that behavior is into the abnormal range most likely, and that's when it's time to call a therapist. So I hope that helps. I would dialogue with the parent about their resistance. That's how I would go about doing it. I would have met with the therapist if I'm a youth minister. I have lunches and coffees with youth ministers all the time, because they want to know who I am. They want to visit with me. And I'm happy to do that. They're a great referral source, and I want to equip them to be able to handle as much as they can handle on their own before it gets to the point of needing me. Most of my speaking, as I travel around speaking, is along those lines, because I do believe that there's a whole lot more that parents can do and youth ministers can do. But, yeah, so anyway, I'm sorry, I got off on a tangent there, but I hope that makes sense, somewhat there. So that would be it. So how do I get my kid to go to counseling if they don't want to go? Well, most teens don't want to go. Normal, I don't know. Even though it's become more accepted and they may know a lot of folks who have gone, that would be another thing. If your teen has a friend that's seeing a therapist and that therapist was good, that would be one avenue to pursue, although that could be a problem too if best friends are seeing the same therapist. It's usually not a problem for the therapist, but it might be for the teens. But that would be an avenue, because then that tells you that this person has built rapport and maintained rapport with a teen over time. But I would just simply say to the teen, look, let's give it a shot for 2 or 3 sessions. If it's really bad, if the resistance is really bad, promise me you'll go at least one time. And most therapists who work with teens know exactly what's coming through the door. We understand that they don't want to be here, that they're either ashamed of being here. Because here's what's going through the teen's mind. The teen's thinking, oh, great, I'm so messed up. My parents think that I'm so messed up that now I've got to go and talk to a big, bald stranger who I don't even know. I've got to tell them about my most intimate thoughts. I've got to tell them about my most embarrassing weaknesses and experiences. And I've got to talk to them about a problem that I don't even really understand. How in the heck am I going to go and talk to someone else about this problem, right? And so the teen doesn't want to come in, and can be incredibly shameful for a lot of folks, and it requires a large amount of courage to be able to get over that. So to be able to say, look, if you just go once, trust me, if you just go once or go a few times, I would give the therapist 2 or 3 sessions to build and maintain that rapport. I usually just focus the first session on that. I've gotten better over the years at establishing rapport quickly, but I never want to rush it. Kip, have a current student who's dealing with cutting as an escaped family struggling, so how do I go forth to help him find a counselor? One, I would talk, thanks Kip, that's a great question. I would talk to the diocese to find out who's on their list. There are counselors, that's a great question, thank you, because even though this blog post, I know it's not thorough, because there's a lot of different circumstances. There are counselors who take Medicaid. There are counselors who have a sliding scale. Meaning that they adjust the fee based on the individual's ability to pay. So I would go that route. I would try that route and see if you can find someone that fits into the financial piece, especially if it's a bigger, more complex issue that looks. My resistant teens giggle. Thanks, Amy, a fellow counselor, Amy, who is great with kids, who's a phenomenal play therapist here in Lafayette. Amy Romero just commented. Thanks so much, Amy, for chiming in. Yeah, so I forgot what I was asking. Yeah, so that would be one. Help them find out who's on their network. If they have a network, I would encourage them to utilize their insurance. The other thing I didn't mention is that a lot of folks have employee assistance programs where they get 5 or 8 sessions or 6 sessions with a therapist as part of their benefits package. So that's another option to explore. That would be 6 free sessions that come to you as a result of being in the place where you work. And if you like that therapist, you could continue on and then pay out of pocket or however. But those would be some other avenues to explore. But I would just encourage them to pick up the phone, find out who's on their plan. Yeah, and Kip, you can certainly reach out to me. I'll be happy to help in that process because there are a few folks who come to mind who might be a good fit for that. You're welcome, Amy. So I hope this helps. Understand that counseling is a process, and it might not be a good fit at first. And if it's not, then find a different therapist. And understand it might take you 1 or 2 therapists to find the right fit. Thank you guys so much for watching. Appreciate your time. Thanks for the comments, Amy, Kip, and Chris. Hope y'all have a great day.